What's going on, folks? Welcome to another episode of Kids Today with Dr. Kamal Jones. I am Dr. Kamal Jones. It is wonderful to be back with you all. We are obviously coming off of this most recent election. At this point, we all know that Donald Trump was selected as the winner of the presidential race. The U.S. Senate has also come under Republican control. At the time that I am recording this, the House outcome has still not yet been determined. It seems like it is very, very close. And so we will see what the result is of that. Today's episode is really focused on where do we go from here and where do we stand right now, more so than it is a breakdown of what happened or why the results were what they were. Of course, it's extremely important for us to understand the why, and there are a lot of venues and folks who are really poring over that data and doing that post-mortem analysis. And we might dig into that in a later episode, but the shifting political climate creates a real urgency of now for kids. And so I really want to focus on the present and what we have ahead of us. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge that everyone is experiencing this thing differently. I will say that 2016 for me was a time where I learned really deeply how divided our nation was. And so while I was extremely disappointed in the outcome of this election, I was not shocked by it or wholly unprepared for it. I will also add that my not being shocked by the outcome doesn't do anything to dampen my concern of the outcome. My concern for a slate of policies which have been touted by the incoming Trump administration, policies which are considered to be largely outside of the best interest of children. And so for a task of this magnitude, it would be insulting to you all if I were to sit here as if I just had some simple list of answers. The truth is that we're going to come up with the answers to this as a community. We're going to come up with the path ahead to this together. And so really, I want you to consider this to be an initial part of that conversation. I would love to hear your thoughts as well as we figure out the path ahead. Okay, so as I think about it, there are really three main buckets I want to touch on as far as what is our strategy, how do we think about the steps ahead with this next Trump administration. Those areas are offense, defense, and some thoughts on how we take some initial action on those things. So on the side of defense, this is unfortunately where we'll be spending most of our time in the next few years. It is about protecting the gains that we've made for kids from policies that would frankly seek to undermine them. And there are several core areas that kind of immediately come to mind to me, but this list is far from exhaustive. It is not in any particular order. Number one, safeguarding vaccines. One of the conversations in the last several weeks of the campaign had been about the Trump administration potentially putting RFK Jr. in some health leadership role. If you are not familiar with RFK Jr., he has been in some ways a leader in environmental health, but he is staunchly anti-vaccine. And if he is indeed put in charge of health policies, we're going to need a strong effort to protect children from fringe science that looks to undermine vaccine safety. Our routine vaccinations have been proven to be safe and proven to be effective, and have proven to be one of the most important tools in our arsenal that have saved millions and millions of children's lives throughout our country, probably billions throughout the world, and are a key component in how we keep children safe. You probably have not met many people in your life who have polio. That is vaccinations at work. You have probably not met many people in your life who have had measles or who have had diphtheria. That has saved so many lives. We cannot afford to go backwards on that. We have to keep a focus on it. Next is protecting immigrant families. We, of course, need in our country a safe and orderly process of immigration, but any policy which leads to recklessly tearing families apart, putting children in cages like the last Trump administration did, rounding up people who look like immigrants, simply cannot be stood for. Next, on the topic of gun safety, it is frankly devastatingly unlikely that we are going to be able to make forward progress on this issue during the next administration, but we have to make our voices heard that gun safety has bipartisan support. We have a bipartisan gun violence bill which made it across the desk of Joe Biden. We cannot afford to go back on this issue. This is the #1 cause of death for children in our country. On the issue of reproductive rights, we have to fight for state level protections. We have to be prepared to donate funds for lawsuits. We have to do everything in our power to ensure that a federal bill does not pass which bans access to abortion in this country. And keep in mind, just because the filibuster exists, which would in theory prevent the Senate from being able to move forward on this, frankly, Democrats said that they would be willing to set the filibuster aside in order to pass abortion protections. So you have to imagine Republicans would be willing to do the same unless we made it too costly for them to advance anti-abortion policy. And so we have to keep the pressure on so that they know they cannot cross that line. On climate, we have to be aggressive. We have to stop any efforts to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords. We have to push back against attempts to further weaken the Environmental Protection Agency. And we have to stop any attempts to weaken the Inflation Reduction Act, which is one of, if not the biggest climate bills in the history of the world. Finally, on the issue of children's health insurance, the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP, is funded through fiscal year 2027. This is an important program which provides healthcare for millions of children. In the previous Trump administration, they attempted to cut billions of dollars from this program, and we were able to stop them in a bipartisan fashion, and they will have the opportunity to do it again in the next couple of years. This is a place where children will need for us to fight for them. Okay, on the side of offense. Unfortunately, this will be a much shorter list for me right now, but I want to just set the stage of understanding that Kids Today is all about how do we move things forward for children. This is not specific to a particular party, though by far the Democrats have led in advancing this mantle, of course, far from perfect. This is not restricted to any particular political group. So if there are any opportunities to advance the health, the well-being, the outcomes for children in our country, we have a responsibility to do so regardless of who's in power, regardless of who it helps politically, because kids do not have time to wait. They cannot be pawns in these adult political games that we play. Two immediate areas that came to mind for me. First, the child tax credit. Donald Trump has claimed to support an increased child tax credit. J.D. Vance has said that he wants a child tax credit upwards of $5,000 a month. So let's hold him to these things. This is a great time to be pushing for an expanded child tax credit, to be putting money in the pockets of millions of American families. And so we have to do what we can to really stretch what they have been willing to do in the past and make sure that these things are done in an equitable fashion. Donald Trump's previous attempts at the child tax credit have been inequitable, favoring those who already had the most. We need to make sure that this money gets in the hands of those with the least. Second is internet safety. There's a bipartisan set of bills, which I've talked about previously, the Kids Online Safety Act and the Children and Teens Online Privacy Protection Act. They are currently in the House. They made it through the Senate in this legislative session. They're in the House and up for consideration, but we have very little time left to get them across the desk and very little political appetite, frankly, to do so. And so if these bills do not make it out of the House, we are going to need to push the the next Congress and the Trump administration to take up that mantle to make the internet a safer place for kids. Again, this is a place with bipartisan support. And so we will need to push them to do what they need to do there. Okay, obviously much more on defense than there was on offense with this administration. But as I mentioned, this list is not exhaustive, far from it. So we'll be looking closely for opportunities to work to advance the health and well-being and outcomes for children during this Trump administration. Now, I recognize that the list of potential threats can feel endless and exhausting. And we know that we can't possibly do everything. But the good news is we don't need to do everything. What we need to do is shore up all the things that we can and then take the issues one at a time as they come. We don't have to do it all at once. And so as we prepare to wrap up, the question that I have is, what can we do about these things right now? What are our next steps? First, we have to focus on building community. Now is not the time to be exclusively working alone, right? Isolation is a key ingredient for despair. And so join some group somewhere. Join a listserv. Start a group chat with some friends. Do something to connect to any group that is working on an issue that resonates for you. If you want to protect kids from guns, consider Moms Demand Action. You don't have to be a mom or a woman to join. If climate is your big concern, consider the Climate Action Network. If you are a pediatrician, connect with your local American Academy of Pediatrics chapter. Do something now to double down on your commitment to advocating as part of a community. Next, spend time getting familiar with the issues. Even if it's just 20 minutes a week to read a couple articles about some of these issues that impact children and families, it can go a super long way. As you take that time, you get more versed in some of these issues, you feel comfortable talking about things that you find to be interesting or important, or frankly, even infuriating. And as you do, you'll likely have conversations with friends or family about these issues. And this work, it's this small daily type of work that lays a foundation so that when issues come up in policy or politics that require support, you and people in your circle will already have baseline knowledge to build from. And so if there's an issue that you care about, start with a simple Google search and learn more about it. And of course, I would be remiss not to say, make sure you subscribe to Kids Today so we can keep you posted on these issues and so that you can hear directly from experts that we'll be having on these and many other topics in the near future. Finally, commit to getting in touch with your local elected officials, whether that's your U.S. representative or senator or your local city commissioner or council member. Commit to calling periodically about issues that impact kids. If folks are keeping their same roles next term, you can start calling right now. If new officials have been voted in place, start calling once they are sworn in. And from day one, let them know that kids have to be a top priority. It makes all the difference in the world. Please believe me, I have spent multiple times talking with in-person members of Congress. I interned with a state senator before. I have heard from them directly that the issues that people actually come to them with, call them about, send emails to their office about, go such a long way in planting that seed and letting them know what the priorities are of their voters. And that is what makes all the difference in the agendas that ultimately get laid out. Okay, my friends, that is our show for today. Thank you for tuning in. I know that this has been a tough week for many people who care about children throughout our country. The landscape for children's issues is more difficult and more complex today than it was just a couple of weeks ago. But I'll tell you straight up, I am full of hope and energy about what we can accomplish if we work together with clear-eyed focus. And to be honest, this hope does not just come from internal, seeds. It isn't something that just sort of generated out of nowhere. I have the absolute honor of being a pediatrician. And what that means is that I get to be surrounded by happy, drooly babies and thoughtful, inquisitive teenagers who don't let you stay down for long and don't let you get away with anything. And they need us. We owe them a world that is better than how we found it. And so take whatever time it is that you need to rest, to recharge, and then let's get to work building the world that our kids, and frankly, that each of us deserves. All right, my friends, until next time, thanks for watching Kids Today.